Welcome to Talking Business, a podcast produced in Melbourne, Australia. The podcast is available on the Acast site, mine website, the Apple Podcast Store, or wherever you go to get your podcasts. Or you can get it at the Business Acumen website at www.businessacumen.biz. I am Leon Gettler. My job is to review and monitor the week's news in business, finance and economics. I bring it all to you every week. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com, or whatever your favourite podcast platform is. This is episode number 28 in our series for 2025, and today's date is Friday, August the 22nd. First, I'll be talking to Matt Masson, CEO of CT Partners, Australia's most influential, independently owned travel buying network, representing 33 of the country's largest independent corporate travel management firms and premium leisure agencies. Together, they manage travel for more than 1.4 million Australian travellers annually. We'll talk about what business leaders should review in their travel program, this EOFY, and emerging trends in corporate and premium travel in FY26. And I'll be talking to independent economist Saul Leslake about what we can expect from the government's productivity and tax summit. The interview was done the week before this week's summit. The government is unlikely to make instant decisions, so a lot of it is about examining the issues that will be discussed. But first, let's talk to Matt Masson.
Well, Matt, why is professional travel support now essential for organisations aiming to drive continuity, control spending and meet the rising duty of care obligations?
Leon, the corporate travel agent is really part of the whole risk management suite to clients. And it's not just about kind of booking travel and finding a cheap airfare. It's actually about managing your people and making sure they're safeguarded when they're traveling for business. And as we know, business travel could mean domestically or it could be internationally. And so having organizations on your side rather than booking directly, say, through a supplier like an airline really is a way for organisations to make sure their people are in the best possible hands.
But at the same time, business leaders need to review their travel program, this EOFY, don't they?
Yeah, this is a popular time for tenders for companies looking for the year ahead. And I mean, this year, I guess more than others, we've seen a lot of disruption in the first 6 months with things like the London Heathrow Airport closure. We've seen volcanic activity. We've seen fires across Europe. And so these natural disasters and also man-made disruptions are becoming more common. So I think if you're not managing travel at your business, you should be thinking about that and exploring options. For those that already do have a managed travel program, the 4 things I'd suggest that any kind of buyer or company should look out for is what type of reporting does that travel company provide and what kind of return on investment, because they should be able to buy more effectively through their collective buying power. Secondly, how proactive are they in finding better value options? And this is something, at CT Partners, the business that I manage, that we're very good at getting the best possible airfares and other travel benefits out of our supplier partners. Thirdly is how well does your travel agent manage risk? And tied up with that is the whole reporting package, duty of care, in the event of an emergency, what kind of information are they able to provide you? And finally, a growing area of importance is sustainability. And there's a lot of reporting tools now in play that help companies manage their own, sustainability targets. And travel is often a large part of that, carbon and other reporting. So there's now very sophisticated technology available through travel agents for that.
What are the emerging trends in corporate and premium travel in FY26?
Well, we're seeing far more corporates meeting in person now on a kind of quarterly to biannual basis because of the impact of remote workers. And I think companies are realizing that it's important for culture and for kind of sharing that strategy and also imparting culture and building relationships within the company to get their people together, whether that's a conference, whether that's a senior leadership kind of team meeting. We are seeing that happen on a more regular basis on an off-site rather than at the office type venue. Other trends are just looking at corporate airfares, and Qantas is the main carrier in this market in Australia. They've just recently released a new distribution technology, and that's really opened up some large discounts for corporate clients. So as of 1 July, there's been kind of an increased domestic and trans-Tasman discount for people travelling through ANZ. So that's something that clients should be looking at. Can your corporate travel agent give you access to Qantas's new, what they're calling premium NDC or new distribution content. And then the third one is just, I guess, people trying to maximize their accommodation, and people are looking at different options. So, like Airbnb and long stay apartment stays are becoming a bit more popular than just kind of corporate hotels. And often that's through, both cost saving, but also if people are staying somewhere for, say, a week or so, they don't always want to be in a hotel. They want to be somewhere perhaps more accessible to nature or to local cafes and shops and things like that. So there's just three of the trends that we're seeing this year.
You touched on this earlier, but travel advice and supplier access is very important in what seems to be a volatile global market. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, knowing, I guess, who to call in times of a crisis is paramount. And the challenge, I guess, when there is a major disruption is that the airline or the hotel, if it's in a city like, say, LA, where there's been a lot of disruptions, the actual end supply gets bombarded or inundated when there is an incident. So by going through a travel professional, that kind of enables you a far better response time. And let's say with, say, airline disruptions, the travel agent will not only reschedule you on a flight far quicker than the airline can in many cases, but they'll also manage your credit, and they'll hold that credit if the airline's at fault, and they'll be able to, I guess, save you time and money by using that credit with the airline to then book you future business travel. And that's very difficult for an end consumer to do, or you have to be very patient to sit on hold with a supplier for several hours to try to go through and manage that process yourself. So the agents and agency networks have those connections and are able to initiate responses much more effectively than consumers.
Well, one of the issues with going through suppliers independently is you're left on hold.
Yes, correct. I mean, at the moment, I won't name names, but some airlines have wait times of 2 to 3 hours, and a lot of them have this, follow the sun model. So it depends what time of day you're calling, but it may be a call center in Australia, or it could be somewhere in Asia, or it could be somewhere in Eastern Europe. And so it means that the people who are handling that issue may not be aware of the expectations of the Australian corporate traveller, as well as having that extended wait time. Whereas most of the corporate travel agencies have a 24/7 response team on hand, and they often use technology like chatbots, or they even have dedicated 24/7 phone lines that you can contact someone in the event of an emergency and get that problem dealt with in 5 to 10 minutes, rather than sitting on hold and getting more frustrated at an airport.
There's lots of collaboration with independent networks, and you actually you're tied up with 33 travel firms, is that right?
Yeah, correct. CT Partners is the home of kind of the more established independently owned travel company in Australia. Leon, we've been around for 21 years, and yeah, those 33 member businesses contribute about $2 billion per annum. So that collaboration between the businesses is really the strength of CT Partners, and it allows us not only collective buying power, but there's a lot of peer engagement and support, and really strong supplier partnerships built up through that collaboration.
I think there'd be a lot of data-driven insights in there, wouldn't there, these days?
Yeah, that's really something that the suppliers rely on from us as an agency network, is to be able to provide them with insight into our clients' booking trends. And it works both ways. We rely on what the suppliers report to us, but we're also providing them insights into things like booking patterns, or say the impact of recent disruptions in North America. What does that look like for an airline's loads in the second half of 2025? Should they be reducing capacity because we're expecting a downturn? So we will collaborate with the airlines and other supplier partners to give them feedback efficiently, because we represent 30 plus companies, and make sure that data allows them to make the best decisions for their business, and not to be wasting, I guess, airplane capacity or staff resources.
I guess you're more or less working as partners, aren't you?
Well, that's why it's in our name. And look, we've always had a very strong relationship with the airlines, and I think there's one of our members, actually, Connections Travel Group, has a philosophy, Ubuntu, which is an African term which means we are because of each other. And really, the suppliers couldn't do it without the assistance of the travel agents, with over 50% of international air travel being booked by agents in Australia. But we also wouldn't have a business model without the aircraft and the hotel rooms and the cruise lines and insurance providers that we rely on to provide that service to our clients. So it really is a win-win.
Right. Okay. So you'd have to, it's not only with the agencies, but you'd also have to work with the hotels, the airlines, the insurance providers, etc., like that. All of you are partners in that.
Yeah, we are. And, we do provide opportunities to get together. Our next conference is coming up in October, where we get about 100 people together in Sydney. And that's a chance for face-to-face collaboration. We do obviously work with people all around not only Australia but globally, and those opportunities to get together face-to-face and talk about business and to network are really vital parts of what we do as an agency network at CT Partners. And often that's where the innovation comes from, or the feedback. I think people, no matter what generation they are in, they enjoy that chance to openly with one another, and doing that face to face, in a meeting room or over a drink at dinner is sometimes easier than doing that on a Teams call.
Indeed, indeed. Well, Matt, that's all quite fascinating and quite important, and we'll look forward to seeing what happens with City Partners in the year ahead.
Thanks very much, Leon. Been a pleasure.
And now let's talk to independent economist Saul Eslake.
Well, Saul, what's your view about the Productivity and Tax Summit coming up from the government?
Well, it's potentially a very worthwhile development if it results in the government feeling able to pursue more wide-ranging economic reforms designed to address significant challenges which the Australian economy and people are facing, not just in productivity, but in housing and budget repair as well, for which the government can't really claim to have much of a mandate, since they went into the recent election with the narrowest majority of any first-term government since the end of the Second World War, knowing that history tells you that first-term governments usually get back, but with smaller majorities. So they didn't really lay out an agenda for ambitious or comprehensive reforms, and yet they find themselves with one of the largest majorities at the beginning of their second term that any Australian post-war government has ever had. And the summit, the roundtable that the Prime Minister and the Treasurer are convening, could potentially, if things go well, open the door to the government to do things that need to be done, but for which at the moment they can't really claim a mandate because they didn't talk about them before the most recent election. Now, that's the optimistic view. The more pessimistic view is that for all the talk in the lead up to this roundtable, there won't be any kind of consensus between the various business, union, community and other groups sitting around the table that would give the government the political room it needs to do what needs to be done.
There's some interesting ideas coming up, like the ACTU wants the government to look at negative gearing, which is really interesting, and which the government actually tried, or Labor tried bringing in 2016 and 19 and lost those elections, which is interesting. And the Productivity Commission has suggested changes to the GST around food, which is interesting.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of ambitious proposals being put forward, and that's good. And I think it's to the Treasurer's credit that, to use his words, he hasn't played the rule in, rule out game, although he and the Prime Minister and others have, I think, been keen to hose down expectations that this will result in the sort of tax reforms on the scale that the Howard government pursued in 2000, or that Paul Keating did in the 1980s. Jim Chalmers, as the author of a biography of Paul Keating, his PhD thesis, would, of course, be particularly conscious of what happened to Paul Keating at the tax summit that the Hawke government hosted in 1985, when Paul Keating argued for what he called a consumption tax, what we now call a GST, and was in effect thrown under the bus by his Prime Minister, Bob Hawke, when the business community and other participants at that tax summit couldn't agree to compromise. And there's clearly a significant gap between the kind of things that the ACTU have said they're going to be looking for at this summit and the kind of things that the business groups that will be represented at the summit are calling for. So while I personally support and have done for a long time removing negative gearing and scaling back the capital gains tax discount, and I think the ACTU's proposals in that regard are a politically feasible way of making progress towards that end, I can understand why the business community is concerned that all the ACTU seems to be proposing is increases in taxes and more regulation of the labour market. You'd expect the business community to cavil at that.
Well, the interesting change is the one proposed to the GST.
Well, it's not clear what's actually being going to come up with regard to the GST. And there's a particular problem here. Again, personally, I would like to see an increase in the rate of the GST and a broadening of the base of the GST as part of a more comprehensive package of tax reforms than simply that. But there is a big political problem with the GST, and that is that as it stands, the federal government would have to cop the odium of raising the GST, knowing that a lot of people wouldn't like the idea of paying, say, 5% more for most of what they buy. They would also have to bear the financial burden of compensating pensioners and other low-income earners for the impact of it on them, given the precedent set when the GST was first introduced in 2000 and by the Gillard government with the carbon tax in 2012. But as things stand, the states will get to spend the revenue. Now, that's not going to work politically. So if there is to be an increase in the GST, and to reiterate, I support that, the nexus between revenue from the GST and payments of that GST revenue to the states would need to be broken. And I'd also have a problem, as I think your listeners would know, with Western Australia getting far more of the GST revenue and any increase in it than they should be getting, which is what would happen under current arrangements. So while I'd like to see an increase in the GST or a broadening of its base being discussed, I suspect that I'm more likely to look out my front window and see a thylacine than of that to happen.
Now, what about changes to productivity?
Well, that really ought to be the first order of business for this. It's difficult. Australia's productivity problem is by no means unique to Australia, which suggests that some, if not most, of the reasons for the slowdown in productivity growth are global factors rather than purely domestic ones. The government can claim a mandate for some measures that would help, at least at the margin, to improve productivity, for example, by removing non-compete clauses from employment contracts that have clearly contributed to a decline in labour mobility, that is, people moving from one employer to another or one type of job to another, that is a source of productivity growth. Similarly, the government can legitimately claim a mandate for seeking to bribe the states to break down some of the barriers that their occupational and professional licensing regimes create that are detractors from productivity. And specifically in the housing space, the government can push the states with mixtures of carrots and sticks to improve their zoning and planning regulations so that the cost of building houses can be reduced and the speed with which houses can be built can be sped up. They would all be good things, but there are other things that could usefully be considered that might be able to reach a consensus between business and unions that would allow the government to press forward. We'll have to see.
One of the interesting, talk is the government introducing tax cuts for investment by business.
Yes, that's been suggested by the Productivity Commission in one of the papers that's been prepared ahead of this summit. Of course, the government is not in a financial position to offer tax cuts to induce increased business investment without raising additional revenue from somewhere else. And I think correctly, the government has asked for any proposals to cut taxes to show how they might be paid for. The Productivity Commission's proposal is to reduce the company tax rate from 30% to about 20% for companies with a turnover of less than $1 billion. In effect, that's greatly expanding the scope of the two-tier tax system that the Morrison and Turnbull governments introduced a decade or so ago, under which companies with turnovers of less than 50 million pay a company tax rate of 25%. The Productivity Commission is proposing to pay for that big cut in the company tax rate for small and medium-sized enterprises by introducing what he calls a cash flow tax, which would provide some incentive for business investment because that would be a deduction from the cash flow tax. But the end result of what the Productivity Commission's proposing is that 500 of Australia's largest companies would pay more tax. Now, that might be politically popular because, there's not a lot of enthusiasm for big companies, but the reality is that big companies create more employment, they undertake more investment, and they are more likely to engage in innovative activities than small businesses are. And, while the evidence suggests that one-off measures like instant asset write-offs for tradies that buy utes or coffee shops that buy new coffee machines do stimulate more investment in those things in the short term, it's not at all clear that those measures have contributed to any increase in productivity that at least can be measured. And it's not at all clear to me that reducing the tax rate for small and medium-sized businesses, while in effect increasing tax for larger businesses, is going to result in either a higher level of business investment, which would be a good thing, or to stronger productivity growth, which we also need.
So your view of the forthcoming summit is not that optimistic?
Well, no, I'm not going to say that ahead of it, because I think the fact that they're having it is a good thing. I think the Treasurer in particular is demonstrating a willingness to consider bolder reforms. Whether he's able to persuade his Prime Minister, who's instinctively cautious, to back him in that respect remains to be seen. What I'm a little nervous about is whether the handful of people who will be participating in this roundtable, only 25 of them, are going to be sufficiently willing to put the national interest above their sectional interests to reach some kind of consensus that then can create the climate in which the government can feel confident to implement bold reform. Now, that might be a bigger ask, but if it fails, it won't necessarily be the government's fault. It will be that of the participants in the roundtable.
Now, what's interesting is that the Howard Costello government had plenty of room in the budget to buy off losers in any tax changes. We don't have that sort of flexibility in the budget at the moment. But on the other hand, the government has massive number of seats and they can probably afford to lose some political capital by making some bolder decisions. What do you think?
Well, you make some important points there, Leon. The Howard government's tax reforms of 2000 did make every Australian better off because the Howard government, had a big budget surplus which it could draw down on. But we don't have a budget surplus now, although we have had, as the government likes to remind us to, in the past 2 years. But we don't have a budget surplus now. Instead, we have budget deficits as far as the eye can see. So tax reform actually has to be about making some people worse off. And that's a much harder political sell than a tax reform package that makes everyone better off. If there were a consensus among the participants at this roundtable as to who should be made worse off, then there might be some prospect for reform. You're also right to point to the government having a very large majority. They do. It's one of the biggest majorities that any government has had in Australia's post-war history. But what they don't have is a mandate for bold reforms based on what they told the electorate they would do before the last election. Indeed, the Prime Minister himself in particular might argue that the reason they've got such a big majority is because they didn't promise anything that voters would regard as scary. And the problem is that in order to achieve bold reforms, you have to take some political risks. Prime Minister Albanese is instinctively cautious. He's perhaps the staunchest defender of the status quo of any Prime Minister that we've had in the last 50 or more years, whereas some of his other ministers, in particular the Treasurer, might be more adventurous, but they're ultimately not the ones calling the political shots. It's the Prime Minister who's doing that.
So we'll watch it with a great deal of interest, I guess.
As Donald Trump says, we'll have to see what happens.
So what's happening in the news? Well, Australia's largest airline has been ordered to pay a landmark penalty of $90 million for what has been dubbed the largest case of illegal sackings in the country's history. Qantas outsourced more than 1,800 baggage handlers, cleaners and ground staff in 2020 in a move the federal court ruled was designed to curb union bargaining power in wage negotiations. The embattled airline's appeal to the High Court was unsuccessful, paving the way for the penalty to be awarded on Monday. Federal Court Judge Michael Lee cited the sheer scale of the contravention, being the largest of their type, as a reason to impose a penalty that would deter other businesses from similar conduct. He ordered Qantas to pay $90 million in penalties, $50 million of which was to be paid directly to the union that brought the proceedings and highlighted the illegal conduct. To deprive someone of work illegally is to deprive someone of an aspect of their human dignity, and this is not assuaged simply by expressions of regret, Justice Lee said. He was scathing about the embattled airline's conduct after the outsourcing pointed to efforts to place a less than candid picture of the outsourcing decision before the court. He noted Qantas had apologised publicly, but then had attempted to deny any compensation payments to the affected workers. And nurses, engineers and other immigrants with qualifications from overseas will be able to work in Australia under a proposal that won support at Tuesday's Economic Roundtable as unions and bosses jousted over a bid to slap a new tax on businesses. Treasurer Jim Chalmers hailed the first day of the three-day Canberra Talkfest as a moment of consensus on skills reform, prompting Labor to do an about-face and start drafting a joint statement of intent after last week downplaying expectations of any international summit-style statement. Any move to allow more people to work in professional sectors would probably face pushback from powerful groups that represent large groups of workers. The Royal Australian College of GPs criticised the fast-tracking of international doctors' registration last year, but Australian Medical Association head Danielle McMullen said on Monday night that the sector was supportive. Independent MP Allegra Spender was a key advocate for skills recognition in Tuesday's session, along with former Treasury Secretary Martin Parkinson. We've got migrants here who I've met. They've been brought here because they're electricians, and then they can't properly use all their skills, or they are qualified nurses. We desperately need them, but they're moving back to France, Spender said. They can't get that recognition. Spender said there was really strong consensus on skills recognition in the meeting chaired by Chalmers, including the need to streamline licensing schemes across states so that people could more easily work across borders. Australian Industry Group boss Ines Willox said, "We're missing out on the inputs of millions of people in our economy because they're not being given an opportunity to work in the field, whether it's across the care sector, engineering, tech." Unions also proposed a 1.5% payroll levy on businesses with turnover of more than $500,000 to fund worker training. The idea was rejected by industry groups, including Master Builders Australia and the Business Council of Australia, and Willox, who called the idea a crock of shit. Among the 315 nuisance tariffs in the government sites are a 5% impost on imported air conditioners and a similar tariff on cast iron pipes and tubes. While most of the roundtable supported the move on tariffs, ACTU Assistant Secretary Liam O'Brien expressed some caution. "It's vitally important that industry workers, unions and indeed employees in these industries are consulted," he said. The roundtable also has tax, artificial intelligence and budget sustainability on its agenda. And Education Minister Jason Clare says the national regulator needs sharpened powers to step in around governance and leadership issues in the university sector and warned Vice-Chancellors not to get too defensive about moves to limit their generous salaries. Clare said that university governance is not up to scratch, as wide-ranging issues including staff underpayments and failure to deal with anti-Semitism on campuses have driven public support for the sector to historic lows. It comes as an analysis as Vice-Chancellor's salaries, published by the Australian Financial Review, has found the average remuneration was more than $1 million in 2024. At the moment, TEQSA, Tertiary Education Quality and Standards Agency, has a sledgehammer and a feather and not much in between, Clare said. There is good argument that it needs better tools to be able to step in and act when it's justified in the public interest and to be able to respond to systemic risks, not just the compliance of individual providers. TEQSA is currently involved in an investigation into Australian National University, where both its Chancellor Julie Bishop and Vice-Chancellor Genevieve Bell have been asked to justify the integrity and competence of their leadership. In a letter to Vice-Chancellor Professor Genevieve Bell, dated June the 30th, TEQSA Chief Executive Dr. Marie Russell specified numerous concerns about the culture of ANU's council and executive leadership and the council's oversight of the institution's financial position. Last Tuesday, Russell told the Senate inquiry into university governance the regulator had been investigating ANU since last October, when a massive $250 million cost-cutting program was announced. However, this is one of those matters where additional concerns and issues have been raised in the course of our inquiries, and that has expanded the scope and focus, Russell said. Running separately to the Senate inquiry is a review of university governance announced by Clare in January. That expert council is chaired by Melinda Salento, Chief Executive of the Committee for Economic Development of Australia. They are looking at everything from Vice-Chancellor's remuneration to accountability, transparency and culture, Clare said. The report has not yet been handed to him, but its recommendations will be discussed at the next meeting of State and Territory Education Ministers in October. Clare is encouraging Vice-Chancellors to be open-minded to the findings of the government's inquiry and to possible changes to Vice-Chancellors' salaries. This is not about belting universities, Clare said, but I have encouraged you in a lot of different meetings to lean into this. And Productivity Commission Chair Danielle Wood says a popular stampede by successive governments to introduce a new rule each time a fresh issue emerges has stifled investment and growth and driven the nation's productivity decline. Advocating an aggressive approach to deregulation at the week's Economic Reform Roundtable, Wood said regulatory hairballs have found their way into almost every corner of our economy. The result, massive blowouts in approval times for housing and major infrastructure projects. Growth has simply fallen down the list of priorities in policymakers, she said, of federal, state and local governments in an address to the National Press Club on Monday. Regulatory creep is in part a function of demand for governments to do something every time an issue emerges, Wood said. When combined with Australians' tendencies to look to government for answers, our Canberra fix, we've ended up with a system that dampens growth. She said a popular stampede by successive governments to introduce a new rule each time a fresh issue emerges has stifled investment and growth and driven the nation's productivity decline. And the profit reporting season continues. BHP, the world's largest miner, reported an underlying attributable profit of $10.16 billion for the year ended June 30, missing the visible alpha consensus of $10.22 billion. This was the miner's weakest performance since 2020. Last year, it reported underlying attributable earnings of $13.66 billion. National Australia Bank posted unaudited cash earnings of $1.77 billion for the June quarter, down 1%. Diversified landlord GPT Group reported a statutory profit of $329.1 million for the 6 months to June 30. Digico Infrastructure REIT reported annualised EBITDA of $99 million for the past fiscal year. The A2 Milk Company reported 21.1% increase in profit to $202.9 million New Zealand dollars. Media's adjusted underlying net profit climbed to $26.5 million, while EBITDA increased 27% to $62.2 million. Lendlease said earnings attributable to shareholders swung to a profit of $225 million in the year to June 30 from a loss of $1.5 billion the previous year. Horizon's earnings before interest, tax, depreciation and amortisation were $1.57 billion, down 48% on a year earlier and below the $1.66 billion to $1.74 billion range Horizon had forecast in February. Ampol's net profit, excluding one-time items, the figure most closely watched by the market, dropped to $180.2 million in the 6 months ended June 30 from $233.7 million a year earlier. Australia's largest steelmaker, BlueScope Steel's net profit after tax fell to $83.8 million compared with $806 million a year ago. Charter Hall REIT has reported full-year statutory profit of $213.8 million, up from $17.2 million in the previous year. Bathroom and kitchen fixtures business GWA Group has reported full-year statutory net profit after tax of $43.4 million, a 12.3% increase on the previous year. Reliance Worldwide Corporation has posted a 13.5% rise in full-year net profit to US $125 million. HMC Capital has reported a record annual result, with pre-tax operating earnings rising 74% to $224.6 million in the year to June the 30th, 2025. Profits of business lender Judo Bank are up 24% to $86.4 million. CSL reported a full-year net profit of $3 billion, up 17%. Challenger has posted a normalised after-tax profit of $456 million, up 9% year-on-year. Hub24 has posted a strong full-year result, with statutory net profit rising 68% to $79.5 million, and underlying net profit up 44% to $97.8 million for the year to June 30. The Perth-based engineering group, Monadelphous Group, posted a 35% jump in net profit to $84 million in fiscal 2025 from a year ago. Junior East Coast gas producer Amplitude Energy has narrowed its full-year loss to $41.3 million. Scrap metal group Sims statutory net profit after tax was $2.4 million for the 2024-25 compared with $1.8 million a year earlier. Woodside Energy's net underlying profit fell 24% to US $1.247 billion in the 6 months ended June 30 from US $1.632 billion in the same period last year. Jobs listing platform Seek posted $1.1 billion billion in net revenue, up 1%, and a profit of $238 million. 4x4 accessories retailer ARB Corporation saw profit after tax fell 5% to $97.5 million, or $96.2 million excluding one-off adjustments. Region Group posted a statutory net profit after tax of $212.5 million. Centuria Capital Group reported an operating net profit after tax of $108.8 million. ASX-listed contractor McMahon Holdings posted a statutory net profit of $73.9 million, almost 40% higher than a year ago. SRG Global posted a full-year EBITDA of $127.1 million, up 29% on FY24. James Hardie's profit fell 8% to US $37.8 million. Fletcher Building's full-year net loss widened to 419 million New Zealand dollars from a 227 million New Zealand dollars loss a year earlier. Cleanaway Waste Management has posted a 14.6% rise in underlying EBIT to $411.8 million for the full year. Transurban posted a 52% drop in annual net profit to $178 million, even as a toll road giant reported increase in average daily traffic and toll revenue for the year. Electrical kitchen appliance maker Breville Group reported a 14.6% rise in full-year net profit to $135.9 million. Spark New Zealand posted a net profit of 260 million New Zealand dollars, down 17.7%. Stockland said full-year revenue rose 48% to $33.1 billion, while net profit more than doubled to $826 million. The Lottery Corporation has posted a 12% drop in net profit to $365.5 million. The Retail Food Group, owner of Gloria Jeans, Donut King, Beefy's Pies, Crust Gourmet Pizza Bars and Brumby's Bakery, has swung to a full-year loss of $19.5 million from $8.75 million. Iluka Resources' half-year earnings slumped 31% to $92 million. Dexus has reported a full-year net profit of $136.1 million, rebounding from $1.58 billion loss a year earlier. Telco Group Superloop has swung back into the black, reporting a net profit of $1.2 million from a $14.7 million loss a year earlier. Magellan Financial Group has posted a 31% decrease in net profit after tax for FY25 of $164.02 million compared to $238.76 million during the prior year. Shopping centres owner Vicinity Centres reported an 83.6% increase in full-year profit to just over $1 billion. Gas pipeline owner APA Group has posted a 6.4% gain in underlying EBITDA, the figure that APA based its profit guidance on, to $2.015 billion. Figure marginally beat the consensus forecast. Net profit, meanwhile, plunged 87.1% to $129 million. VG1 Partners Global Investments reported a loss of $28.2 million before tax, down from an $88.4 million profit the year prior. Step One Clothing posted net profit of $12.7 million, up 2% on the $12.4 million reported in 2024. And that's it for this week. And next week I'll be talking to Nicholas Woodward, the country manager of Pack and Send, the company that provides customers customized logistics solutions for businesses of any size, and that has helped countless Australian businesses pivot and grow. We'll talk about the biggest mistakes of Australian businesses when scaling up and how to enhance customer experience through packaging. And I'll be talking to AMP Capital Chief Economist Shane Oliver about the latest profit reporting season. For the most exclusive access to leading economists and business leaders from around the world, subscribe to Talking Business from our website, leongettler.com, or whatever your favourite podcast platform is. If you like Talking Business, please leave us a review with Apple Podcasts. Thank you in advance. In the meantime, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, or X as is now known, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. If you want to contact me, email me at leon@leongettler.com. I answer all emails. Also in my spare time, I have a copywriting business. If anyone needs newsletters, blogs, articles, or advertorial, email me. Looking forward to the next episode of Talking Business.